Thank you very much. So my first question would be, are you convinced by open science already? So we've had a lot of talks throughout the day, all trying to convince you that open is better. So who thinks open is better? Show of hands. Okay. How many of those who raised their hands, keep your hands up. How many of you were already convinced that open is better before you came?
More people.
No change.
Okay. Okay, so for the rest of you who are not convinced yet, we're trying to hammer the point home now with a presentation that's essentially giving an answer to the question, what's in it for me? And when I say we, Joe and me, Peter Kraker, we have prepared short introductions so that you know who is talking and what's our background. So I'm a postdoc at the KNOW Center, which is a research center in Austria, located at Graz University of Technology. A lot of you here are from research centers that sort of bridge the gap between industry and science, and the KNOW Center is such a center. My topics are visualizing scholarly communication on the web and alternative metrics, research-wise. But on an advocacy level, I'm also a Pantone Fellow of the Open Knowledge Foundation. You've heard of the Pantone principles earlier on. So there are also fellowships that give you some time to devote your work directly to open science. And out of the two actually activities over there, I also became the maintainer of an open source visualization called Head Start, which you can find on GitHub. So I sort of try to talk about this spectrum of open science that you see here. And now on to Joe.
Great. So my name's Joe MacArthur. Call me Joe. Joseph is what people call me when they're very angry at me. But I am the Assistant Director of the Right to Research Coalition, which is a coalition of around 80 graduate and undergraduate student organizations from around the world who are interested in educating and advocating for open access, and more broadly, we talk about open science. I got into this through co-founding the Open Access Button, which is a tool which helps researchers get access to research behind paywalls and tracks how many people are hitting paywalls, and essentially tries to use that to advocate for open access, for not having paywalls. But my background is, I suppose, I was a pharmacology student at UCL until a year ago, and during that time I'd kind of worked in various academic labs, but also for Big Pharma for a little while. So I have a fair bit of research experience on my belt as well. But some people may also know me from a conference series known as OpenCon as well, which I'll touch on, I think, briefly midway through one of my presentations.
All right, so what is this session all about? Why did we propose this session for the YEAR conference? Well, as you all know, one of the frequent arguments against open science or doing open practices is the current academic recognition system. So people say, well, I'd like to publish open access, but I need to be in the high impact factor journal. Or they say, well, I could publish my data openly, but then again, if I sit on it long enough and just try to get as many papers out of the data that I have, then I will get more recognition in the end because I got more papers. So our argument is, if openness is done right, it's better for the community, which is sort of a given, but it's also better for the individual. And in the session, we're gonna touch on the following objectives. So we want to give you an understanding why we think that open is better on all levels, not just on a high meta level. We want to give you very practical knowledge on where to put your stuff, because that's the essential question, right? If I want to get recognition, where do I get the recognition? We will also want to go briefly into alternative metrics, something that Jean-Claude Bugelmann also touched upon this morning, which we think is key to the open science recognition system. And then we will also talk about stuff like recognition for reuse. What does that mean? Recognition through collaboration and how open science can help you with that. So these are the things that we're going to do today. So we'll start off with a group discussion in a bit. Then Joe will talk about why openness is good for you and the community. Then I will go into practical tools and examples and guidelines. And afterwards, I hope everyone saw the email that I sent out maybe 1.5 weeks ago. And you all brought your research output. So who brought a research output for the session? Raise your hands. Okay, so we will have 1, 2, 3, 4 groups then. Okay, very good. Because you're going to go and put the research output brought along online, and then we will see what were your experiences during putting it online, and then also communicating it to your community. That's the second goal. Okay, so but since we're always talking about the recognition system. Much like Jenny set up before, turn to the people next to you, maybe groups of 3 or 4, and talk about how does the academic reputation system affect you? What do your supervisors tell you? Do you have to take rankings and impact factors into account? Maybe it's even in your contract that you have to. Yeah? And how do you feel about all of this? Is this, what do you think about the current situation? So we'll give you 10 minutes. So maybe, 3:20. We'll go through the room and hear some of your feedback on these questions. So, yeah. Off you go.
Okay, folks, I think we're going to bring it back.
All right. That's a topic that really concerns everyone, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Guys, we're gonna feedback as a group now.
Okay, so maybe let's start with what kind of rankings, ratings, factors do you need to reach? I know this group in the front, they discussed, I think there was a divide between 2 different, the more application-oriented and the more fundamental research strand.
Yes, correct. It's also a question about how you define research community. To me, the research community is mostly consisting of other researchers in my field at other location. But I mean, the other people in my group thought it would also be the VTT, would be like a community by itself. And I think the question, the answer depends on how you see research community. For example, at VTT, money talks, and at my community, publication talks.
So, and what kind of what indicators do you need to reach for the money, and what do you need for the publications? Do you have like a level of publications that you need to reach? Do you have certain quality that you need to reach?
I don't know if there's a certain level. I think in both cases, the more the better.
Okay, so it's simply just publish, publish or perish, just put everything out there.
Well, of course, it's the question about quality as well, but the more high quality publications and the more money, the better.
Okay, maybe some input from the VTT group on the money side.
We have a quota that we have to publish a certain amount of papers per year, or that is, there's a goal set for that, but nobody really cares about the impact factors as long as you get those papers out. But then again, much more weight is on your patent applications and customer money that you bring in the house. Publication, I mean, yeah, certain amount of papers, that's fine, but we don't really talk that much about the impact factors of the quality of the journals.
Yeah, I heard that position as well. There were some people who really guided by the impact factor. Or did I get that wrong? Anybody who needs to take the impact factor of the journal into account when yeah. Can you say something about it?
So I have two supervisors, one at the university and one at the institute. So for the institute, it's practically the same. So it's only about getting projects and having patents and having monetary values. And for the university supervisor, I have to have like a certain number of publications before he will consider my PhD thesis finished. And the number is basically based on how good is the ranking of the conference or journal where it was published. So a certain amount of papers, like about 2 papers if it's a very good journal, and more if they have not so high impact factors.
And so how do people feel about the impact factor and using that as a metric for how successful you are? I know I saw a lot of people express resentment. Slobodan, you're shaking your head.
I'm a little bit frustrated with that because, for example, in my country, it is by the law, you know, it is in our law that is, you know, for funding the research is only counting the impact factor. In order that you can defend your PhD thesis, you need to have by the law, you know, papers in the journals with impact factor. And, you know, the impact factor is not the best model. I mean, it works not so bad in the past, but, you know, there must be some much better models for that.
And it also means you're baking the rating agency into the system, right?
Yeah.
And that went very well in financial system, as we know, right?
Did this happen with all not so developed countries on the south of Europe? I mean, almost all of them accept. I mean, those lobbyists from these big publishing houses, you know, they did the job for them, really good job there, but not for us.
Cool. And so I guess the last point we have on here is, what are your supervisors telling you? Anyone got any burning opinions from their supervisors they'd like to relay to us? Right at the back, Jenny.
Yeah, mine sent me an email earlier with IF3, and I couldn't work out what he was going on about for about 10 minutes before I realised it was impact factor. That he was describing a journal we were publishing in. So he's very pro impact factors, but because I am moving out of the research area that I was working in for my PhD, I don't really care at the moment. So we're having, he fortunately has to publish open access anyway because of his funder requires it. So that's okay. But I just wanted to say that we had a little conversation here about impact factor and its importance to research producers versus research consumers. And between the three of us, none of us pay any attention to impact factor when we're consuming research and we're deciding which papers to read. But we do pay attention to impact factor, whether by our own kind of volition or because our supervisors tell us to, when we're producing the research. And so it's just an interesting inequality there. And I'd be interested to know if anyone in the room pays attention to the impact factor of journals when they're reading papers.
Can we have a hands up if you're scanning the impact factor before you read the abstract? We got one hand. I'd love to draw that out if we could. Could you grab the mic?
So now that the mic is beside me, I'll make one point. In Finland, so they've created this. They've created this system. I think they were trying to improve for over impact factor. The word I don't remember. Maybe one of the Finns can say the word when I describe the concept. So they're rating all of the publications between 0 and 3, where 3 is the nature, the solid state circuits, the top. And then number 2 would be the good quality journals. Number 1 is the good quality conferences. And then 0 is the not good conferences, crappy journals. And my supervisor says, okay, to do your PhD, you need to accumulate 10 marks from this scale. And the problem with this scale is I can understand it was set up to try and improve the system, but it's decided by, we understand, a small group of people, and it's become quite political. And there's a lot of arguments in the academia when the ratings change. For example, I recently published in a fairly high impact factor journal, and I was very excited. And then I looked to this system, and I saw that the mark had been downgraded in the same year. And then went back to my supervisor saying, are you kidding? We put so much work into this, and now it's been downgraded. And then he said, the confidence in this system is also going now because it's political and it's being influenced by other factors.
Right.
So we complain about impact factor, but the question is, how can we improve? What's better?
Well, that's a very good point, I guess.
Good point to move on, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, yeah.
Sorry.
We'll take that while we change slides.
Thank you. The name of the system is Julkaisufoorumi, so it's publication forum.
Is there something?
Sorry.
I didn't hear what the name of the.
It's Julkaisufoorumi, so it's publication forum.
Okay.
The direct translation. But about the comment about the impact factor, I don't look at the impact factor as such, but I do pay attention to what kind of journal it is. In the same way, I rate the information I read, whether it's from journal or just a newspaper. So it's not the impact factor, but I mean,
you look at the
more known, the more reliable in principle.
So you might look at the brand before you read something.
Not necessarily the brand, but who is in the editorial board and from which institute and what kind of writers from which institutes and things like that.
Okay, cool. On the 0 to 3 system, it doesn't sound great.
No, not at all. Like the impact factor sounds so much better now that you describe the system. It's like
yeah. The impact factor, while not great, is founded on some sort of some data, which isn't just kind of people sitting in the room deciding. I can see where they may have been coming from when devising the system, but as you say, it's going to become inherently political, inherently difficult for that metric to be objective. And so, I mean, that wouldn't be a recommended approach to metrics. We'll talk about a few more throughout this. Do we talk enough about impact factor? A little bit, yeah. Make sure we do. Okay, so what am I talking about? So essentially for the next 10, 15 minutes, I'll run through why, even within the traditional metrics that many of you are familiar with and the hoops that you have to jump through, an open approach is a better approach. But it also opens up a whole nother sphere of which you can be, I suppose, rated or judged by, and generally broadens that out. And I think we'll kind of begin to argue that that is a better approach, but that even if you don't take that as a given, you're still coming off better through an open approach. So very briefly, these are where my slides are found. They're all CC BY except where otherwise noted. And it's worth mentioning, actually, talking about putting things online. I put these online last night, and I woke up and looked at them today, and they had 200 views without me doing anything with them. Because that's the power sometimes of putting things online, and people had tweeted about them, and I was pretty pleased, even though they weren't 100% finished. So this has to be one of my favorite graphics, because I think it probably sums up how most people feel when they're in academia or writing papers, right? That feeling of when your paper is cited is a very, very happy moment, and people are paying attention to me. But in many ways, it kind of sums up the current system of measuring and judging research that we have. It's often about how much you get cited, which feeds into the impact factor, which feeds into how good people think your research is, which is unfortunate. But let's say we play the game and we say that that is the only and most important metric of your work. And let's look at what an open approach does to geocitation. So this 2014 European Commission report kind of shows a really clear benefit that there is a citation advantage for freely accessible papers. That's not necessarily openly accessible, just freely available online. And that actually there's a kind of, as it says, citation disadvantage for non-freely available papers, so papers behind a paywall. Similarly, there have been about 70 studies done on this citation advantage for open versus closed papers. And very usefully, people have started to compile what these different studies say. So we've got a total number of studies, 70, and studies that find a citation advantage come out around 45, and ones that find no advantage, 17, and ones that were inconclusive, non-significant, or kind of looked at other things were 7 of those. So they kind of, some of them don't fit in this bunch in a strange kind of way. But you can see that on balance, it looks like there's a citation advantage, and these studies have been done, everywhere from last week theoretically to maybe 10 years ago. So that citation advantage has probably changed over time as it's become more and more accepted that open access is a good idea. But 45 studies saying that there's a citation advantage isn't bad. But I think we haven't spoken much about preprints at this point, but this is another element, another route to being able to do open access. If you have to publish behind a subscription, or even if you want to publish open access, publishing a preprint, which is essentially a non-peer-reviewed version of the paper that you're about to submit, online can have a significant kind of downstream benefit on the number of citations that you have for your journal publication. And this, in many ways, again, makes good sense. If you get your research out there early, if it's out there for longer before the article is published, which can sometimes take, weeks to years, this, it can start accruing citations before it's even published. And essentially what the red line is showing you here is that articles that have a preprint are cited more in these fields of astronomy and for stuff that's posted in Arvix. I mean, I'm not going really deeply into the detail, basically. I'm just showing you lots of different sources that are saying roughly the same thing here. I don't want to dwell on this point too much. It's worth mentioning that the citation benefit is probably different in different fields, depending on I suppose in some cases, prestige and quality of the open access journals in that field, and just the norms around that area. But this is obviously taking a kind of pretty wide look at the sciences, and in almost all of them, you see a significant advantage from publishing open access for your citations. And one thing it's worth mentioning also about preprints, a kind of bonus here, is that often in many highly competitive fields, you're often competing with other people. You're essentially racing other labs to try and get to the discovery first, right? And preprints allow you to very quickly get your idea out there and kind of put your stamp on an idea. The rock in the water idea is actually kind of, throw your rock in first, right? Is quite a nice idea. We've spoken about Nancy earlier spoke about the green route, or depositing an article in repositories. And it turns out, again, kind of unsurprisingly, that putting your article in a repository, putting it in more places for more people to see, for more people to access, leads to more citations of your work. So on the left here, you can see this is a randomized controlled trial of around 350 articles in a relatively established institutional repository. And what the bar on the left shows you is essentially that ones that had full text references in Orbi, which is the repository name, were referenced around twice as much on average than articles that weren't posted in that institutional repository. So while it may take a little bit longer to post an article in a repository, if what you're looking for is citations, then you're going to come off pretty well. Of course, we've spoken about impact factor a couple of times already today. There are a number of problems with the metric. It essentially measures the average citation in a journal, and the average citation rate of an article in a journal, but it's done as an average, which means that essentially it's very, very skewed. The top 10% of papers in that journal will accrue most of those citations, while there's a long tail of ones where the impact factor really doesn't apply. So it's a terrible way to measure the likely citation rate, or even the quality of an article in said journal. You really need to look at other things. But for many of you who are at the moment constrained by the impact factor, there are lots of different options for you to publish open access, or I suppose true open access, that have really respectable impact factors. This is mainly a pretty biology-centric slide, but I can make one for different areas. I'm a pharmacologist, so I just happen to know many of the journals on this slide. So I quite like it. But it's also worth mentioning that the kind of grip that impact factor has on our society is changing, thank goodness. The Declaration on Research Assessment, otherwise known as DORA, is a really strong statement from academia, essentially against impact factor. And this statement, or I suppose at this point, almost petition, has been signed by some of the kind of most well-respected agencies and scholarly societies and funders and all sorts of organizations in the area they're saying, we don't really accept impact factor as the benchmark for our research. So I've named a few of the organizations there, but there's 550 other organizations and now 12,400 individuals as well. So this is starting to represent, a good slice of the academic community who are thinking that this is not a fantastic idea. So I guess if you're looking at citations, an open approach is kind of a power up on your research, right? We've seen numbers of 40%, citation benefits. Posting it in a repository, enables you to be able to get maybe 50% more. 50% more citations. Preprints again increase your citation rate. Doing all of these things starts to, turn your research into something which is going to accrue way more citations if that's what you're dearly looking for, right? So I hope people know Mario. That's blatantly where that's taken from. So again, just to circle back, if citations is what you're looking for, open is a good approach, right? But let's look a little bit broader than citations, right? That's really all we've discussed at this point and what came out of the group discussion earlier, citations, impact factor. We can look a little bit broader than that, and an open approach allows us to look at that. So we normally talk about papers being cited, but we just had a great talk from Jenny talking about data, right? So I could grossly edit this to say when my data gets cited. I just spoke about preprints, and I could again poorly edit this graphic to show that. And I guess more and more the academic CV doesn't look like the traditional academic CV. It looks like things like this, where we're looking at not just citations, but also downloads of articles and data sets and where it's been used. We're looking at social medias. We're looking at how much people are talking about the article over social media. We're looking at how much articles have been viewed. An academic CV starts to look a lot more like this, where you're looking at articles which have been highly saved by Mendeley viewers, which is another thing behind how much articles are being read. And actually, Peter has a really good comment on this earlier over lunch. He was saying that essentially citations used to be used as a metric for how much a paper was read, right? They didn't know how to measure that 60 years ago. So they had to find kind of the point at which that was measurable, which was the citation in the literature. Well, now we can tell how many times something has been read without lifting a finger, which is really, really powerful. And I think on top of this, looking outside of the my slides are out of order. This is what happens when I PDF my slides without checking them. Let's go back. Increasingly, we're seeing that blogging and articles in the press are also counting towards at least some part of your science communication kind of portion of your time, and this is a really interesting way to get collaborators and to get your work out there and have an impact. And for many of us, if we're not constrained by the impact factor agenda, we're just constrained by the impact agenda. I know that's kind of what's going on in the UK at the moment. What this is showing is essentially, let's figure it out. So this is essentially trying to talk about the impact of open access on the views a paper gets. So this is from just one journal, Nature Communications. There's lots and lots of studies on this, but this was the nicest graph I could find, so I kind of went for it. The red line shows the views over the course of kind of 700 days for an article behind a paywall in that journal. And then the black line, which is a good few times higher, shows the views that a paper gets when it's open access. And I think I don't need to explain the difference there. So when we're talking about making your work openly available on the internet and your career, a few years ago, people were having to kind of say things like this, that if publishing in open access journals may cost your career, then many early career researchers like you were saying, that's not a career I want. That was somewhat the decision I made when I moved out of academia as well. But more and more, this doesn't have to be a decision that you make. At the moment, as part of OpenCon and a kind of conference and community that we're running, we're currently hosting kind of a series of talks of people who have had extremely successful careers while practicing kind of exclusively open science. And now the move is certainly towards this being the norm rather than a closed system. I think a number of speakers have spoken about how this change is irreversible. Yeah, and there's a number of other benefits to your career. Titus Brown, who did this webcast for us, spoke about how the number of collaborations and talks that he was invited to was greatly increased because people could see what he was doing and he was blogging about it and making it understandable to people. And so that was, he found to be a real driver for his research. And now I haven't used a Mac in ages, but I want to talk about skills really briefly because they're kind of crucial to your career, right? And in a context where we're going all open, I think this point is important. So let's hope this works.
The thing I want to leave you with is to think about how what you're going to be told by the people more senior to you relates to what you actually need. So people like me, I was an academic, I was a tenured academic at the University of Southampton. I then had a government job at a research institute. I got that first position 15 years ago now. My thinking about what it takes to get a job is 15 years out of date. Even for those processes I was involved in selecting people for jobs in the limited scope of academia, were really focused on what they had done in the previous 5 years. You're not applying for a job 5 years ago. You're going to be applying for a job in 5 years' time. And you will want to present yourself as the future of the department, organisation, company that you're applying to. That doesn't mean ignore the advice you get. It doesn't mean that people don't know what they're talking about. But just keep in the back of your mind that your job is to look forward. And everyone's experience is looking backwards. Look at the direction of travel and try to understand how you can put yourself out in front. Because that's what will ultimately position you best to take your needs forward. And the nice thing, coming back to the beginning, is that actually if you do that, I strongly believe you'll also be doing a better job of delivering on those larger public aspirations to make the world a better place. I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
So that is basically saying, look to the future rather than the past, and I've lost where my slides are. And build skills to be able to work in an open environment now. And that means building some experience as well in doing that. So Cameron ends on the big picture, and so will I. That's actually quite a small picture. Let's look at the big picture. And just say that many people like Erin and all of you got into science not to add value and to add knowledge to the world around us, right? And there's really very little, if someone can make a strong argument to me that research that no one can see and that no one can reuse is more valuable and is adding to knowledge, I want to hear it because I haven't heard it yet. So I will make a little made argument here, but one that I think is at least for me pretty powerful. Making work open, making it more valuable is essentially why almost all of you, I imagine, would have got into this in the first place. And I find, and I think many others find, that if you're doing stuff you believe in and you're doing stuff that you think is effective, then that makes you more motivated to do good work, right? And that's going to impact your career far more than anything I've spoken about, is if you're motivated, if you're energized by what you do, and if you believe in it. So I've created a lot of numbers, but I think that's kind of where the real value of some of this stuff comes in, is in just in knowing that what you're doing is really making the most out of everything that you're putting into it. That's kind of the end of what I'll say on this front. If you want to learn more, I mentioned our webcast series earlier. We're talking about open science in your career, so open science and metrics and how it's affecting what's going on. And I can encourage you to go and check those out. So that's my last bit of talking.
All right. Thank you very much. So are there any sort of burning questions at this point that you would like to ask? Yes, in the back.
Okay, so yeah, the question that's been burning in my mind is open science, is opening in general going to collide with the current economic paradigm? So capitalism is based on taking ownership and leveraging profit from that ownership. And when we're opening up, we're giving up that ownership. Are we giving up our potential to leverage profit from that ownership? Of course, it's good for humanity, it's good for society, but economies are contracting, government funding is contracting, more and more we're having to look towards businesses, and how do we get businesses? We give them something that nobody else can give them. But if we've opened everything up, what do we have then to offer for these businesses?
That's a question, yes. A very big one. Do you want?
Yeah, I mean, that is certainly an interesting question. And my previous life was actually not in kind of open science. It was actually looking at access to essential medicines. And there, we talk about, rather than copyright, we talk about patents. Where that question is one that is often posed, right? We used to argue for kind of liberal licensing around patents, essentially, so that medicines could be used by the poor, which strikes me as a pretty good argument. But that was the argument that came back to us all the time, which was, we're going to lose money by doing this, and in that area, when you're doing patenting, and looking at tech transfer and stuff like that, there is a really big culture of we're doing this essentially as a profit-driven enterprise, and that's the real culture in that area. When I reflect on that and your question around this area, is at least in kind of mainstream academia, it's not. There's no existing culture of commercializing the kind of work that would end up in papers, at least not to the same extent as in other areas, or at least not that I see. I would love to know if that's kind of off now. But I personally wouldn't be too worried, because the culture hasn't really been there in the past. Authors aren't paid to write these papers. Often they're quite willing to share their data. And I think maybe one of the open data bingo ones for next time, maybe I want to make a lot of money out of my data, right? But it's not one I hear cited a lot. Does that vaguely address your question?
I also think that, we're often talking about patenting, and I know that at least universities of technology, they make no money off their patents. For them, it's really the best case when they get the costs in that are associated with patenting. And so it's really a question whether patents add any value at this point of the innovation, also the quickness of the innovation cycle, whether patents have any value anymore. Of course, there are sectors where it's no question they're still there. But on the other hand, also I think we're seeing developments like open innovation, And this is also something that the European Union is heavily drawing upon. And I think open science feeds directly into open innovations, because companies can go out there and they can just take the stuff that comes out of the universities, and then they could put it into a product, right? No, they can't, because they still need the knowledge of the people at the university, usually, because you can't just take anything off the internet and make it into a product. That's why open source companies thrive off support contracts, for example. So I think a lot of this locally generated knowledge is still very valuable. And in the old system, you could only help one company at a time, because then you just assigned all the IPR over to that company and shared it maybe for some time. But now you could potentially help a lot more companies in your area that would have never thought of taking the knowledge transfer in and taking all the potential up that's there.
Sorry, I just want to add into your response, because one thing about open access is the fact that we talk about publicly funded research. So this, since it's the public's money, it comes from taxpayers, the public needs to get back the research that it has paid for. So one ethical reason to share your research is because it's money that, first of all, you went to the funder, you asked for the funder supported you with the money, and then you have the moral right to return back the results of the research for the advancement of the society. Then my other concept that I have in my mind is people and researchers, they need to focus on two different things. Either they want to conduct research to advance the society, or if they want to make money out of it. And it's up to each personality to decide what it is that they want to do. But, for example, one person that I personally worship is Sir Tim Berners-Lee. He created the internet. He didn't sell it. He's not extremely rich right now, but people like me, I know that there are many people out there who love him only because he gave us the internet, and I cannot live without the internet. So he's not a very rich person, but he is a useful person. So it's up for publicly funded research. I think that it should go back to the researchers, and it should go back to the institutions, and it should go back to the public. But generally speaking, every researcher should consider what is this that needs to be a priority. And I'm not saying that making money isn't always a good priority, because we all need to live, and we need the money in our societies.
Yeah, thank you. I think that I think we're going to stop the discussion at this point, so we can still get to the practical examples. But we will have the fishbowl discussion afterwards, and I think any comments will be very well placed there. But let's just take a look at the practical tools and some examples for getting recognition, because we may not feed off too much money in research, but we all feed off recognition. And there's actually an emerging ecosystem out there for open digital science. Jean-Claude Bogelman touched in the morning on if you remember, the circle with all the different tools. And I'm gonna dive into this ecosystem now and give you a few examples of how it worked for me and how it worked for others. This talk builds on top of another talk, which is also very nice because everything's Creative Commons licensed by Erin McKinnon and Ross Mounts. And you can also watch it on YouTube. They introduce way more tools than I ever could in 10 minutes. They have a whole hour. So if you're really interested, check the talk out and find more tools there. Okay, so what will be the main takeaways of this session? The first one is, if you want to get recognition, go where your community is. That's maybe the most important thing. And if you only take 1 point away from my talk now, it's this: go where your community is. It does not, you may be obliged to put everything in your institutional archive, but no one's going to find it there. The second one is interact and collaborate with your community. A lot of recognition really comes through collaboration and through interaction. So you should always take care of the stuff that you have put out there, and try to follow up on any discussions that revolve around it. And that's sort of the third part. Be aware of the metrics that are out there already, you know, and take a look who actually is interested in your work. And fourth, yeah, this is a point, the term me-former. I think it was first coined in a Twitter paper. So me-former is someone who always talks about him or herself. So it's just putting out there, you know, I've got this new paper, come to my conference, and so on and so on. And these people, they get boring pretty quickly. So you should really make an effort to communicate with the community and not just slash them with your stuff. Okay, I'm gonna talk about preprints first because we've already talked in the previous sessions about them. So we'll be very quickly through these slides. But a preprint essentially means that you deposit your work in a repository prior to submitting to a conference or a journal. And in many scientific disciplines, this has been established for a long time. So, for example, CERN, they had a whole mailroom of people, you know, who were just getting preprints from around the world that were sent by mail and then put into different researchers' postboxes. And so that's how they were exchanging upcoming research, because back then the publication process took even longer because you had to mail out all the papers to the reviewers. So, and you couldn't send a chase up email quickly. So what are the benefits of preprints? Well, I think preprints are really good scholarly practice. Why? Well, you give others immediate open access to your work. So many, there are some physicists here. I bet you spend a lot of time on arXiv, where everything is just posted. And yeah, it means that others immediately know what you're up to. But it also means, and this might in some sense be the same thing, but it is not. It makes your work visible to the world immediately. So in science, you're often rewarded for being the first one who is doing something. And this is something where you can make sure that everyone knows, you know, you did this right now, here it is, deal with it. And it also starts the discussion even before publication. When I go to a conference, I present research that has been done maybe a year ago. If it's really good timing, maybe 6 months ago. But that's not what I'm interested right now in, right? So the discussion actually that would have been useful to me, that was 6 months ago and not at that point in time. Yeah, you need to take care of some things. So you need to check journal and publisher policies. And yeah, that's the last point is you need to find an appropriate preprint archive where your community actually is. So for the the benefits, so we see one of these mail rooms here. So we have just done away with this, and now it's a nice server somewhere in Cornell. Yeah, this is a paper, an email that was a follow-up of a paper that I put up last September. I think I put it up on September 1st. I got a reply on September 2nd. And maybe the important point here is that it was from a professor in Harvard. And so I don't know about you, maybe you're getting emails from Harvard all the time, but for me this was a pretty big deal. It was also for my supervisors, so they were nearly falling off their chairs at that point. No, but what I'm wanting to say is there are people that looking at the stuff on the preprint archives because they know that's the freshest thing out there, and that usually good people post to these servers, and then they will selectively read the papers and they may respond. And so we're actually now in a collaboration with them, which is really nice. This is another example, another paper that I posted online. I think, yeah, 2 days ago or something, I found this conversation, and it looks like I made it up, but I didn't. So because the person says, and we can read it because it's available open access, and the other one says, hooray. So that really warmed my heart that someone out there is really interested in the stuff. This was the Zoidberg moment that Joe referred to. And this is also a paper that hasn't been presented yet. This is a conference paper. So yeah, I had the Zoidberg moment way before it should have actually happened. Yeah, so Sherpa Romeo is really the tool if you want to check whether it's okay for you to post a preprint. Do check, because even if you think your journal doesn't allow it, you will be surprised how many journals and conferences actually allow you to post a preprint. Yeah, then archive.org is I think the grandfather or the grandmother of all preprint archives. It's preliminary in physics, math, and computer science. So if you're in these fields, you probably already know this, so don't really have to go over it. There is a biology archive, which is more geared, of course, to biological sciences. But there's also a social sciences research network. So really, almost for every discipline, there is a preprint archive out there. You just have to find it. Yeah, and there are more. This is a list that I got from Joe. The slides are online, so afterwards, when we do the exercise, you can look up, if you're not sure which preprint archive to use, you can use this list. Yeah, so, but you can only put papers online. You can put almost anything online nowadays. Of course, only if it's in a digital form, but you can publish your data, we have heard that. You can publish images, you can publish slides, you can publish source code, you can publish posters. And why would you do that? Well, if you put the research materials online, others can build on top of your work. And probably everyone here knows the saying by Newton, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants. I think this is a very nice image for academia. And if we not only have the paper, but we actually have the materials, then this saying becomes a completely new meaning. Because then you really can build on top of the other's work, and you don't have to go through all the reproduction steps that you had to do beforehand. Another thing is, if you put your research materials out there on many of the platforms, you will get a digital object identifier. So this is a number followed by a string. And how many here know what a digital object identifier is? Let's make it. Okay, not many. Well, essentially it's a unique identifier for any research output there is. And having a DOI means that you can play the whole oddmetrics game, that other people can find you, and especially that machines can find you. And so this is very important for retrieval. Maybe not by humans. They're using Google Scholar or whatever to retrieve your papers. But if a machine wants to know if this is your paper, you need a DOI. Yeah. Again, as with the papers, you need to check with your research outputs that you have the legal right to put them online, especially with data that can be very tricky. But there are ways to do it. You should assign a permissive license. We already heard that earlier on, because you really want people to reuse it. If they're not reusing it, they're not going to cite it. So that's very easy. So make it easy for people to take your stuff and incorporate your stuff, because that's the only way they will recognize your stuff. Yeah, and then finally also choose a service known to your community. So it doesn't really make sense to put it somewhere where people will just say, oh, it's just some stuff off the internet.
Just one question.
Yeah.
You can always update the content, right?
Yeah, usually what they do, they don't really allow you to replace the content, but you have different versions. So for example, with the preprints, you can submit the version before peer review, and then you can submit the version after peer review. And that's actually a very good point, because I've seen many papers out there from really reputable scientists where the after peer review version looks a lot different from the pre-peer review version. So you shouldn't be afraid that some huge mistakes may be uncovered, because there's always mistakes going to be uncovered. It's just the way you deal with it that makes the difference. Okay, quickly for self-archiving data, if you're looking for repositories, this one is the Registry of Research Data Repositories is really nice. So you can input your discipline and it will spit out a few repositories where you can put the data. There's also Figshare. On Figshare you can put figures, data sets, media files, papers, posters, file sets. You can also connect to GitHub. That's maybe interesting for some the more computer sciencey people here. So if you connect your GitHub, you can get the DOI for your repository. There is also a cool alternative that I like to mention. It's Zenodo. It's European funded portal. It basically has the same functionality as Figshare, but it comes out of the open air universe, so to say. So this one's really, really open. So I really recommend using Zenodo at this point. Okay, what are the benefits? Well, some data sets out there. This is talking about an article talking about oceanology. They're more cited than the most cited journals in the field. So we're still, in the beginnings of the data citation movement. We have a lot of data that's still uncited, but examples like this one, with examples like this one, you can see we're slowly getting there. Yeah. So we're seeing an increase in data citations, and if the trend continues, then in a few years, data citation will be a norm. Other benefits are you can see how many people are actually viewing your research output. So this is one of the examples from Figshare. So I just put a poster up there, and I think at the conference, maybe 50 people saw my poster, and online I got another 230. So that's actually pretty good. And then also, this is my GitHub repository. So GitHub is a way you can put your source code online and then collaborate with others. And you can see here that some people watching my repository, some people even think it's a good repository. But then there's also here is the fork button. And that means that 8 people have actually taken my source code and then created a copy of that source code, and they're now building on top of my work. And they're probably doing things that I have never dreamed of. And if that's not pretty awesome, I don't know what is. Okay, posting to social media. Who here is on Twitter? Give me a sign. Okay, good. Who is on ResearchGate? Okay, more, yeah. So most of you are familiar with one or another social media service. It's a nice way to do scholarly communication outside of the usual circles. So you don't have to go to a conference or publish in a journal or send in a response to a journal. You can very quickly interact with other people on their work. And it also gives you the possibility to break down the main message of your paper. So a lot of people just skim the paper at first and then decide whether they want to read it. Well, here you can even skip the skimming part and write a short blog, and then maybe people get interested in your paper that weren't interested in it before. Yeah. Just putting something on social media, again, will not get it read. So you need to find the right hashtags, the right channels, the right communities, the right lists. And it can be very time consuming. So what I'm always telling people, find one service that you really like, maybe 2, and do it right on these, right? You be very consistent on these, communicate with people, but then stop. Yeah? You don't need a 3rd, a 4th, a 5th. It's just too time consuming. Yeah, so it's also very nice to have a blog, so somewhere where people can find you on the web. This is my blog. But what you should also try is to get your stuff into other blogs that are read by your community. So this is from the London School of Economics and Political Science, the Impact blog, and this is the one in bibliometrics that everyone reads. I just pitched them my idea for an article, and they said, okay, you know, just send it whatever you have. And this article got as many views in a week than my blog, my personal blog, does in a year. So it's really awesome. If you climb up the curve, suddenly what can happen to your work. How many here know I fucking love science? Yeah, yeah. 20 million people like this Facebook page. Do you know how many likes Justin Bieber has? 70 million. So we're getting there, right? It's a third to a fourth of Justin Bieber, and that's also, I think that's pretty amazing, actually. So, and whatever is posted on the I fucking love science sites, it really matters because potentially 20 million people can read it. Yeah, Twitter. I like Twitter, but it really depends also on your personality and whether your community is on Twitter. But you can get a lot out of there. So this is one of the tweets where I pitched a paper of mine. What's always very good is to add a hashtag. So this is the Altmetrics hashtags that's read by the Altmetrics researchers. Do add figures, slides, you know. Make your content visible within the ever-changing stream of the social media tour. Here's another nice example from Erin McKiernan, and she also added people in the field where she thinks they might be interested in this specific paper. So that's also a very good way to do it. Okay, and then there's the holy trifecta of research social networks, ResearchGate, academia, and Mendeley. And they're probably the ones with the most users. Jean-Claude has put up some numbers this morning. So I think they're all worthwhile to use and to interact with your community. Don't underestimate the power of the mailing list. So in many fields, there are still mailing lists out there where the most prominent researchers are on there, and they're reading these lists and they're posting to these lists. So go out and find these lists because those are the ones that are really mattering in some of the communities. So for example, the SIG-Metrics mailing list in bibliometrics is just everyone's on there. Eugene Garfield, more or less the founder of bibliometrics, he posts every week on the list. Another one is the Association of Internet Researchers, a very active list that internet researchers might be interested in. Okay, so when it all comes together, a single tweet can gather 14,000 impressions. So this is really a combination of a tweet with a picture, a good channel, so the PhD chat. If you don't know this channel on Twitter, follow it for some time. Might be interesting for you as a PhD student, because a lot of the issues that PhDs have are being discussed there out in the open. And so, yeah, this is an example where suddenly one of your tweets gets propelled into the consciousness of the people on the Twitter sphere. Also, on the same blog post, I got an invitation to give a talk. So this actually, more often than not, this happens via email, but this one was publicly, so I put it on the slides. So if you're visible out there, and Joe touched on this, you will get much more invitations to talks, panels, and generally to contribute to events than if you're not. Yeah, final point, Altmetrics. So now that you've put all the stuff out there, how do you check whether it's really taking hold? And that's Altmetrics. the idea of MERT metrics is that you don't just count citations, but that you count everything. You count likes, you count reads, you count how many people blogged about your research. You just take all the reactions that a single research output has and put it together. As with any metrics, treat these numbers with caution. So we've heard today that in some countries these numbers are baked into the system, and there's no sort of, let's say, qualitative interpretation of the numbers. I think that's very wrong. So you should always qualitatively interpret the numbers, but then they can be very helpful. And you need a unique ID, so a DOI, archive ID, PubMed ID, you know, whatever identifier you can get hold of, really try to assign it to your paper, because that's how you play. And I'll just give you one example of how you can check how your work is received on the social media and elsewhere. And that's the Altmetric bookmarklet. So Altmetric is a company that aggregates social media data. And they have this nice little bookmarklet here. And you can drag it to your bookmark toolbar. And then you visit any of your papers. So this is one that I did with colleagues on research data. And then you can click the bookmarklet, and it will show you how many people talked about your archive paper. And again, this is a paper that wasn't published yet. So, and then you can even go into more detail. So if you click here, it will show you actually the data behind the numbers. I wouldn't give too much weight to this number in the donut here. Yeah, this is where you should really treat with caution. But the tool is very helpful. You can see who reacts to your work, and maybe you can also use it if you want to get into touch with people that are interested in your work. Yeah, and here are two papers that are not necessarily because they're high quality papers, they have high Altmetrics numbers. So the first one is a case on disappearing teaspoons. So it's people that just set out teaspoons around their research center, and then they monitored whether they would disappear or not. So there's a very funny study, obviously. It also has a follow-up on coffee mugs, yeah. But it's probably not the most groundbreaking research out there. And the second one, this was published before the Scottish vote on independence. And so this was a paper, I think, that was in favor of independence. That was one of the outcomes. So it got highly tweeted by the supporters of the Scottish independence. So they can be very useful, these numbers, but don't make the mistake of creating a ranking just out of what appears inside the donut. All right, the main takeaways: go where your community is, interact and collaborate with your community, be aware of metrics, don't just be a me-former, be an informer, and go where your community is. Thank you. Oh, okay. All right, so we're not going to do the hands-on thing. That's a shame. Okay, so there are 4 people who brought a research output, right? So we're going to do it. We're going to just not do it right now, but we're going to see how we can put it online. So just so we can do a little wrap-up session. Okay?
I think we'll probably take like 2 questions. Otherwise, the organisers will growl at us. So first hands, I guess.
So I'm going to go back to my previous question. I hope I don't come out as stupid or slow, but the previous talk was about data that supports your published paper. Now, what kind of open science or open access you were talking about? open access paper, so an open access article, or data that supports your existing paper, or a preprint, or just any individual data set that you want to put out there that is not or will not be published. So how do you categorize this a bit?
What, in what I was talking about?
Yeah.
So in all cases, the preprint or the repository paper or the data set would have been linked to the article that it was discussing. Is that your question?
So you're not talking about data that you have not published or you're not planning to publish in the near future?
Well, I think there's also a blurry line what's a publication nowadays, because we see more and more data journals, for example, pop up. And the idea of a data journal, I mean, there are different categories, but the way I understand the data journal is that you publish the data set with some information about it, but it's not necessarily a study on the data that you just published. And I think that's also the oceanographic data that was on the slide before.
Because I think the way I see it, a lot of the comments that we're having, I mean, pro or against open science, open data, is actually directed towards a specific case, a specific type of data. And I think we should split it down into smaller pieces, because I'm getting confused here.
You were advertising a bit this preprint databases, and if I remember correctly, you were saying while the reviewing is going on, you can sort of publish it there, but usually the journals want exclusivity for the paper publishing. So if your article gets rejected, you would then resubmit it to another journal. Would that still be like exclusive original publication, or does it work for some journals?
Most journals don't see that as a prior publication if you put it on a preprint server. But you have to check with their policies. But usually within a field, they're pretty consistent. Cool. But do check, the Sherpa Romeo tool is really a good one for that.
Should we finish up?
I think Jenny wants to say something. No, we cut her off earlier on.
Yeah.
It was just to say with the data, because it is confusing, that open science, one of the things that open science as a kind of broad definition does is essentially expand what we class as a research output and a publishable unit of research, if you like, and what form that publication takes. So the reason I focused on data associated with public papers is because it's the least scary form of data sharing possible. But you're absolutely right that other forms of open science would include publishing data before you publish, and that is something that most open science kind of people who promote open science would say is a good thing. But like let's start with the system that we've already got and work forward. So I just wanted to clarify that I wasn't excluding other forms of sharing data in my conversation, but the reason the Panton principles went in with kind of published data or data associated with published articles is because it's not as scary. And these were written 6 years ago, 7 years ago now, and so the momentum wasn't there at the time, so they had to kind of dial back somewhat.
Yeah, I think there's also the notion of open notebook science, and that means really that you publish the research as it happens. So you go into the lab in the morning, you do an experiment, you post the results online, and there's whole labs devoted who are actually doing this in biotech, which is the most competitive field ever, right? So there must be something in there for them, apart from obviously doing the right thing.
There's no patents for that, that's for sure.
Yeah. But I think at one point, there's a nice saying in English, you can't have the cake and eat it too. At one point, you have to decide, do I want to go into the open side, or do I want to, steer on the safe side and on the closed side? And we had the earlier top argument today, but a lot in science is about staying ahead of the curve. And if you're open and really out there, your chances of staying ahead of the curve are a lot higher than if you just steer on the safe, on the conservative side. it's a gamble. You may fall off the edge, yeah, but at least you can go out in style.
Okay, we should probably wrap up. Thanks for listening, everyone.